Alright, let's get this started. Let me just fix the mic real quick. Alright, so I want to use this opportunity to discuss some of the stuff that I think up and want to develop with my own fanfiction that I write maybe once every half year at this point. With, of course, all the normal fanfic review videos, it's just based on the fanfic that I'm reading and my thoughts on specifically that, and very little would I deviate from speaking about the fanfic that is being covered. And of course, since the focus is all about the art of discussing writing fanfiction and also, the plots and ideas that are sprouted from specifically Blue Archive fanfiction, I thought it'd be interesting somewhat to go over some of my own thoughts. This format is obviously going to be very disorganized. I don't have a story to work off of, and it's just I don't know exactly what I want to talk about, how much I want to talk about. Even though, I haven't really written that much, I feel like it would be sort of a waste to describe in great detail the things I plan to write about, because let's give myself the benefit of the doubt and say that I will eventually write these so-called masterpieces. I'd like them to be an exciting and novel experience for anyone, even those who may be listening to this right now. But of course, I want to first discuss some of my old works, the works that I already have out, and why the updates on them are slow and why I don't really have the drive to work on them. So most importantly, let's start with Late Nights at Chalet, LNAS. I want to say, I'm pretty sure without a doubt, that's the biggest fanfiction, not necessarily word count, but by notoriety that I've written. It's just because it's so simple. The premise, it's just a late night in the chalet office, sensei and one student that he happens to have an intimate bond with. I think for me, the beauty of it is that since all the stories are one-shots and they're all disconnected, you can at will decide if all of the one-shots are within the same universe, and sensei just happens to have a really close relationship with every student. Or you can also imagine that every story takes place within its own universe. Its own universe, and that in each universe, sensei has particularly a very intimate bond with just that student, if not maybe 2 or 3 at most. And of course, Fluff Comfort in general is just nice to read. It's relaxing. It doesn't really command you to charge all your emotions. It's a really nice way to unwind, I hope, as the person who wrote those. The reason why I'm not really working on that collection anymore, it got to a point where it just felt really dull, stale, repetitive. I don't know what's the best word to use. But the main thing is that after the first couple entries, which were Serena, Ichika, Seiya, and Akko, the novelty of the setting that is repeated with every entry is gone. And so when I'm writing, it's mostly I mean, every story, of course, is going to be different because it's a different student in a different story, but even with the clear differences between each story, overall, with the one-shot collection of that nature, where it doesn't have a little bit of an overarching continuous plot, it just doesn't get interesting anymore to write, because there's no what will happen next, just what will happen this time. So there's no intrigue for me to develop, and so there's no excitement, and there's no like deep thought in that matter. Of course, I enjoyed writing the chapters I did. LNAS was born out of a desire to see Sensei, of course, as the stand-in for myself, the reader, be comforted by a student during late night and those insomniac hours. Of course, to fit with the theme, I always write late nights of Shelley chapters, and almost all fanfiction that I write is always past midnight at minimum, if not 1 or 2 a.m. So, I'm writing from a place of experience when I develop those stories, even if I am not an office worker. Even so, after like I said before, after the novelty wore off, it wasn't as fun to draft the stories anymore. The only reason why I would have written future chapters is if I had a especially strong attachment to a particular character that I think would be interesting to write an LNAS chapter for. Otherwise, the LNAS premise itself is not the main reason why I would want to write another chapter. Similarly, even worse off, DPOR, Daily Protocol, Oxytocin release, the Hug fanfic, the Hug one-shot collection, that one fell off fast, with like a third of the total chapters written, maybe half, I'm not sure. The main problem there is that because the entire climax of each chapter is the hug and how it feels, there's not really much to go off, and you can only do so many types before they all start to sound like each other. So it's just kind of lost at that point. After just the first 2 or 3, it was like, all right, like, what can I come up with this time? And the main thing too is that with those kinds of stories, the hug is the climax, and it's only like maybe 5 or 10% of the chapter itself. So most of the chapter is at that point LNAS, but not at night in the office. And one-shots are fun, just little snippets of various stories. Developing that is not bad at all. It's just when it gets to the point where I want to start developing compelling narratives, just developing a bunch of one-off one-shots is not the direction I want to go right now. So I would rather draft for a chapter fic than actually write and publish out a one-shot for that reason. I feel like my priority is better spent on trying to develop those chapter fics. There is one chapter fic in progress that I do not plan on abandoning, even though the last release, chapter 1, was ages ago. Do You Fear Death? The fanfic starring Hina and Akko. That one, I think the premise is really strong. The only problem I have is that I'm not in a situation where I can afford to put that much focus into writing. So it follows that if I try to develop the next chapter of DYFD, I'm very afraid, and it's highly likely as well, that's the source of my fear, that the chapter is going to end up way below the quality expectation I would have for it. Because I'm already bad at world building. My main focus when I write is character development, either character relationships or self-discovery, themes of that nature. I write with a very limited scope, so I'm very able to extensively describe what's happening to the POV character and everyone around them. But I have a really hard time with imagining what's going on outside the protagonist lens in the entire world around them. Like, there are people who are really good at that and can draft entire plot lines of events that don't even happen in the story just to keep up with a consistent world. I find the idea of that valuable and not boring, but I'm just unable to do that because I care so much about developing the characters. I'm just unable to sit down and really think about the entire world around them because there's always factors that I don't consider even when I try to consider as many as I can. And of course, even though I say I find it fascinating and necessary, it's just not as fun for me to try to develop settings as opposed to characters. I think my strength is with building characters, and that's why the LNAS chapters and fics of that nature work so well for me, is because that focus solely on how characters felt in that story and scene. And so, even though some people, maybe myself included, would say it's kind of undesirable to have a story based on entirely like third-person narration and dialogue with very little description, that's how the LNAS chapters are written, because that's what I'm able to do. And they work out fine enough, I would hope. So the problem is still that DYFD, despite being a very heavy character-based story, would still falter if I don't spend a lot of time on imagery and just developing how the world is functioning given the events of the plot and things of that nature. So I need to give myself a lot of time to consider that, or else the story will really fall by the wayside, and I'll have wasted a really, really good premise just because of my inability to give it time. Even though I've given it a lot of time, the time has not been spent on it. So that's a real shame, I suppose. But unlike a lot of the other fics that I've come to realize that I haven't given them enough thought, so they won't be able to thrive for long. DYFD, I had in mind how I plan to end it. So the premise is strong, and the ideas I have for it are mostly concrete. It's just a matter of sitting down and having the time to really develop it in a way that will be the best story it can be. Now, I do have a couple others, of course. I have one more that is ongoing and probably not abandoned anytime soon. Hiatus does not mean abandonment. What's it called? You Before You, Unseen Before You, is the LNAS sister fic, where it's very heavily styled with Sensei and a student we know hanging out together, but it's in the lens of a completely outside third-party student who Sensei doesn't know, none of us know, not even I know really, and she's just watching all of it unfold every single time, miraculously. The idea with that story is that it follows the LNAS nature, where every single chapter where Sensei hangs out with students are technically independent of each other, but the main driving point that is supposed to make the story intriguing is that the protagonist student is supposed to discover what she wants, especially seeing everyone with Sensei, and have some more self-confidence, I would like to say. Most of the reason why she finds herself in these situations is because she's a very laid-back person. That part's not a flaw per se, but the way it impacts her is the way that she would like to amend, to make her more of an outgoing, more confident person. That's her goal. So that's where I would like to head that story. Of course, like DYFD, it's a decent premise in my opinion, but I need time to think about where it's supposed to go, or else it's going to be doomed, just like DYFD. So that's why both DYFD and You Before You are chapter fics. One is a chapter fic. One is like it's a hybrid. It's a one-shot collection with an overarching plot, You Before You. So I just have to give those time. And when I have an opportunity to develop them, I hope I can make them something that is entertaining and also compelling. Now, on to what I want to talk about most is a couple of ideas I have that are in new development. So ideas I've had very recently. I want to discuss a couple of the revelations that I've had with my own desires in writing, which led me to come up with all these new ideas. The main one is that I no longer want to write fics that include sensei as either the protagonist or even a strong supporting character. Sensei can exist, of course. If I'm writing to have the story similar to BA canon, I would have to have a sensei, or else I'd have to change a lot of the details. The main thing here is that when I draft protagonists, I want them to be someone who starts off as either unremarkable or undesirable in some way that can't really be overlooked. If we make sensei that kind of person that's in some way undesirable and for all intents and purposes unfit to be sensei, that makes it really weird in the context of the story, because why is this person sensei when there is most likely someone else much more fit for the role? And so when I try to make these kinds of fics, my personal problem is that I'm trying to write a sensei who's frankly a bit immature for the position he's in. And it just makes the story feel so awkward and unreal. The fact that sensei's doing what he's doing in the stories I try to draft, it just doesn't really make sense. And the worst part is when I try to draft senseis that are able to actually participate in combat, it doesn't really feel right to me that he's engaging in combat with students, even if they are literally more durable than him and are more capable soldiers than him just due to their nature, upbringing. It just doesn't sit right with me that a full-grown adult is beefing with students. So having sensei as a titular character, protagonist, it's just really tough for the ideas I have in mind. So moving forward with the drafts I have, I strongly discourage myself using sensei at all. So if I can maybe, come up with plots where sensei just doesn't have to be in the picture, that's really nice. Where I can have a student as a protagonist, someone who is on a very similar emotional level to a lot of the students, and at least in the same age bracket. So when there's mental and emotional conflicts that arise, it doesn't feel weird that there's this huge age gap in a mental immaturity battle. I don't really want to fully discuss the ideas I have in mind for it, but what I can say is I wrote a one-shot a while back called I Vow to Protect You, something like that. It follows a student, Haruki Sakura, who I spent quite a bit of time developing, I would say a couple months at least. The idea is that I wanted a student who resorts to drastic measures and blames it on sensei. The problem here is that I can't have sensei outright oppose her. That's not the sensei way. And it also feels a little unrealistic to have sensei, who has basically all of the students on his side, have a fair fighting field against Haruki, who is just alone. While the weapon that she's trying to hunt sensei with is supernatural, that's not going to stop all the strong students from absolutely dogpiling her. This includes, of course, Hina, Mika, Wakamoe. That's enough by themselves. Those three, no matter how strong of a weapon Haruki has, it's very unlikely that she can take all of them by herself. So even though I still plan to develop that kind of story, and given what I just told you, you're just going to have to suspend your disbelief for the time being there. The main point is that I want to... Alright, this part's going to be a little suspect. I don't like making my protagonists remarkable people. I already said that I like to make my protagonists start off as a little undesirable so they can grow to become desirable people, character development and all that. But I especially want them to start as especially unremarkable, just so everything can go not their way and just lots of good conflict and stuff like that. It arises from the fact that I see so many fanfics that have really overpowered protagonists that are often self-inserts, often senseis as well. And so, looking at that, I just think all of these stories that have these strong senseis exist. So why don't I write a story that has a non-overpowered one, or an especially underwhelming one, so I can, show off something completely different? And I think I'm cooking there, but the matter of the fact is that the fanfics I have to show for it are pretty underwhelming. Now, I don't necessarily have to make it an underpowered, underwhelming sensei. It's just the protagonist. So, of course, I could always make it so that a student protagonist is very underwhelming, but grows to become someone, maybe even a dependability level of Hina, Maybe not that high, because Hina is exceptional, but somewhere up there, because they are still the protagonist, so she has to be remarkable, even if she starts off the bottom tier, level 1 crook. So, when I draft ideas now, my first thought is student protagonist. At this point, I just forget Sensei is even is even able to be a character. And then the main thing, the next couple things too, is when it comes to conflict, I really want moral grayness. So I don't dislike stories that have clear-cut heroes and villains, but when I draft these fanfics, I'm not looking for a story where good triumphs evil, even though it's pretty good plot. Pretty sure Blue Archive itself is already doing that, so I want to change up the story a little bit, and that starts with not doing what they're doing, which is good defeats evil. So when I write conflicting characters and antagonists to the protagonist, my first thought is, how can I give them an understandable motive that still somehow directly opposes the protagonist, so they cannot come to a sound compromise. And mostly how I tried to approach this initially was to make the protagonist just not inherently good, just to make them act, I don't want to say selfishly, but act impulsively. So they don't act a hero, but even if they are the protagonist, they don't act hero-like, but of course they still should have a motive that the audience, the readers, resonate with and understand. So that's my goal with writing the conflict, developing the conflict. With Haruki, I want to go back to Haruki for a little bit. With Haruki, the idea is that she lost a lot of her loved ones, she lost a lot of her life, and she just happens to blame Sensei, who was not there to save her when it mattered. So while her actions of trying to assassinate him out of revenge, petty revenge, they're not in the right place, but her motivations are not particularly incorrect. Wanting to fight for the sake of your fallen loved ones, I think, is perfectly reasonable. It just happens that she's not solving any problems, she's just trying to cope with a really bad situation. So that sort of empathy and pity without straight agreement with the protagonist's actions, that's kind of that balance that I strike for. I enjoy, the idea of philosophical topics like that, where if there's no clear-cut right or wrong, how do you determine that? Do you determine it solely based on who the protagonist is, or what motives you resonate with more? Things like that. I would like to say the end goal for me is to make the antagonist have ideas, methods, and desires and motives that people can root for and empathize with heavily, but still root for the protagonist just because the story is leading in a direction where the protagonist has more to lose, and therefore it would be a greater victory for them. Possibly something like that. So moving aside from the plot aspect of drafting fanfics, I want to talk a little bit about how I approach writing. As I said before, I suck at world building. I suck at very descriptive writing. I am a very concise writer. I like to make it short, simple, and to the point. So I also heavily subscribe to using a lot of subtext. I don't like to state things, even though a bad writing habit of mine might be to state things. My intention is hardly ever to just state things outright. Especially when I make dialogue, I try to have them speak in a way that I assume people would speak in real life, where they hint at what they're thinking instead of just saying it, because that's how people are. And I think that is powerful for storytelling, because having the reader figure out most of the details, at least in my case when I'm reading, and that's the case, it is fun to go through all of that. So it's just, I see a couple of fics where details are just plainly stated, and a lot of what is being said and revealed is very on the nose. It's like it leaves no room for interpretation, and it feels kind of awkward. It's stuff like that where I just think if I was to write those specific scenes and moments, I would want to hide some of the information, be a little less literal with the dialogue, add a little bit of flair, nuance, based on how the characters, the character voices as well. I don't really want to go too long in this, because obviously I can't really pull out any specific examples now, but just in general, I think everyone should endeavor to add a little more subtext into their writing, make things less obvious, and make especially dialogue seem more natural, and give the readers a lot to figure out on their own. Just don't make it, an overbearing puzzle. And again, I suck at world building, so I wouldn't be able to do those anyway. I can't make any complex scenarios if I can't even build the scenario to begin with. I don't really think there's more I want to touch on right now. Yeah. Even if my ideas were a little unorganized, I think I said a lot of what I would have liked to say, and just stuff that's on my mind in general. And of course, as I continue to review fanfiction, I'll be trying to hopefully develop my own, and as I learn more as a writer and reader, I can also share the stuff that I see as I grow. And if I have the wherewithal and the material to continue talking like this, hopefully in a future where I actually write fan fiction, so I can use this as an opportunity to verbally reflect on the chapters I wrote, how I think they turned out, how I thought it would turn out, and what I can do with those chapters moving forward, things of that nature. But for now, I think I've said enough, so I will conclude this video here. If you listened to the whole thing, thank you very much for your time, for giving me your, how long was that? Like 45 minutes? You skimmed around. Thank you anyway for skimming to the end. I mean, it must be really hard to skim through this video when there's no like direct on-screen visual elements showing what's being spoken, because if I had to edit all of that in, this would take ages. The main goal with this is just to present my thoughts verbally in sort of like a personal journal entry that I'm just happy to share with others. I don't really want to make it a thing where I'm transforming what I'm saying now into like a digestible, engaging video. And I don't want to call it a podcast either. That's definitely not what this is. I think calling it a journal entry is fair enough. You know, my very unfocused, unorganized thoughts that I hope, if it reaches certain people, will either entertain them enough or maybe inform in a way that I either intend or did not intend. Either way, hopefully I can continue growing this channel, which I would like to say as well, growing the channel is definitely not the key of the Kudakko channel. I just want to share my passion for entertainment, which is the voiceover and reaction and discussion and thoughts, while also kick-starting a place for people to share their own thoughts on the fic that I can also look at and respond to as well. So, you know, a very selfish goal, but it's not in bad taste, so it is what it is. And with that being said, that is the final thought, so I will say goodbye, I guess. Goodbye.